Welcome to In Conversation with the Safety Collaborators. I am Karen.
And I am Nuala. Whether you're a safety professional, a leader, or an individual committed to making a difference,
We invite you to join the discussion on creating a culture of safety and care, enabling your team and leaders to design a safer and more productive and collaborative world. Karen here. I just wanted to pop in before we launch into the actual episode today. We are delighted and very grateful that Steven Kirby decided to join us today. He has a very powerful message and powerful story to share, and we want to encourage you to please listen all the way through. Be aware that it's emotional and that it may touch your heart. Feel free to reach out to Steven at any time at www.sklifecoachuk.com. He loves to have a conversation with people. He loves to help. Enjoy the show.
today we are joined by Steven Kirby, a friend of Safety Collaborations. With a background in construction and demolition, Steven had a life-changing event 13 years ago that totally changed the trajectory of his life. Steven is a public speaker and safety well-being advocate for transforming mindsets for workplace safety and mental well-being. We are delighted you have joined us today to share your story. And I'm going to dive right into it and ask you, Steven, what makes you, you?
Well, thank you for having me. I would say what makes me, me. The accident I was involved in 13 years ago probably has turned me into who I am today. So if that incident had have never happened, I wouldn't have gone on to study what I've studied for the last 12 years, which has turned me into me. So I'm a different person to the guy of the day of that accident.
How do you feel about sharing about that different guy?
The guy when I was 32 before the accident was a very confident guy. I was a 360 operator. I'd worked probably at that point in construction and demolition for 12 years. I started out as a labourer, but then obtained my plant ticket quite quickly. But that guy, when it came to mental health, we didn't talk about mental health the way we do now 13 years ago, but obviously depression, anxiety, it was all still there. But if anybody told me they was depressed, I was that guy telling them to man up. It's all in the head. Crack on with it. It's an excuse to stay off work. What you're going to do? Go and stay in bed all day? That kind of attitude. But then after the accident, I suffered massively with PTSD and self-medicated with alcohol and spiraled into my own depression and suffered with anxiety and panic attacks with the PTSD. And from that, I've gone on, as I say, to study mental health and well-being. And now, obviously, my attitude is completely different. Mental health is real, depression is real, anxiety. It's not just in your head. It is something that we really have to work with and support people who are struggling. So my attitude from 32 to 45 is completely different.
Doesn't it always amaze you how I think of even when we were younger, if you had a physical something, I mean, I remember falling out of a willow tree in my garden and breaking my arm. There was no question, straight off to hospital, off to the doctor. This needs to be set. It needs to be fixed. It's visible.
Yeah.
Whereas what was invisible, what was actually going on inside. You know, we often have that conversation of, well, just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and it doesn't need to be looked at and worked with. And I think that has been a wonderful transition that the world is going through, is that we can actually acknowledge exactly that. I mean, physically, I look absolutely perfect, but are we aware of what's actually going on within that may be impacting the decisions that we're making, the conversations that we're having, and the way that we're working?
Exactly. And there's obviously, when it comes to, you've got your stresses of your home life and your stresses of work. And if you're turning up for work and you're going through something at home, but you're not talking about it, you're kind of telling yourself that you're dealing with it, that's going to impact your safety of yourself and your colleagues on site. So I'm trying to encourage more communication and people to be open about what they're going through so they can get the help that's needed.
And how easy or not is that process?
It's easy in a sense of me talking and doing what I do, but
Yeah.
then it's up to whether I'm speaking to, whether it's a group of 30 people or whether it's 500 people in a room. It's what are they willing to take away from it? What are they wanting to take away from it? And there is still, even though it's a lot better now, there is still that attitude. A guy came over to me last week and I did my presentation and he said, Steve, my attitude up until an hour ago was the same as what you was at 32. Man up, I'm sick of hearing about mental health, just get on with it. He said, but having seen that, he said, I've got a lot more empathy, I'm going to start listening. And that's why I do what I do, because I just want people to just think differently around. People don't like the word mental health. My mum hates it because back in area, right, you got sectioned if you had mental health issues. So I kind of phrase it as in just your well-being. It covers everything: your physicality, your mental health. But yeah, if people are willing to be more open and talk, it makes all the difference. And I think the younger generation find that a lot easier. So when I'm speaking to apprentices and stuff, because they're being brought up with this, they do find it easier to talk. It's the older generation, like I'm 45, and I think like 14 onwards, it's those guys. My dad left when I was 10. My mum and dad got divorced. I still had a relationship with him, but they got divorced. When he left, even though I was only 10, I felt I had a responsibility to look after my mum and my sister. I was the man of the house, and I witnessed a lot of stuff as a kid. But I think that made me, or I thought it made me mentally strong. So I took that moving forward. And where we lived on the estate, you have to be mentally and physically strong, or you got bullied, or you got stuff took off you, or you got took advantage of. So you have to be tough. I took that through my teens and into demolition I started in demolition when I was 20, which again is a male dominant industry. Even though I probably was going through certain things like splitting up with girlfriends or whatever, you don't want to talk about it because you just think your workmates are going to rib you to bits and basically laugh. Whereas the reality is they probably wouldn't have. I probably could have spoke at that point, but I just felt that wasn't what I could do. And I think there's still guys today that think they've got that same mentality. Like, I can't say no because they'll think I'm an idiot or they'll think I'm soft. And it's like now I know that by talking about your emotions and talking about what you're thinking and feeling, it actually shows more strength rather than that manly attitude.
I was going to say there's a term we love, and it's vulnerability. And when we can bring vulnerability into our work environments and spaces, and it's rewarded, it's not punished, then it creates a whole different conversation and a whole different way of being, not just for yourself, but actually for the team and for setting that example. Just think about safety rules, and we will definitely get to your story because I think it is just so incredibly powerful. There's so many people in our working environments who are in a place where they don't have to learn from their own mistakes. They don't have to learn from their own incidents or accidents. And if we can create an environment where people can be vulnerable to share their story and their experience and say, this is what happened, this was the effect that it had on me. What can you already start doing differently? What can you change? What different questions, conversations can you have so you don't have to experience this? We can start creating safer workplaces.
And I think that is really, really important. Like, I know a lot of people who actually share their stories and talk about incidents, accidents, and mental health and the mental health journey. And for somebody else to see somebody being vulnerable, as you say, and talking about their journey, it encourages them to then think, yeah, I need to talk, I need to open up. So it is, and yes, I love that word as well. I'm very vulnerable, and there's not wrong with that.
There isn't. And I think when we talk about vulnerability, this is where I'm going to bring in the word psychological safety. You know, if we think about the workplace and how do we support that mental vulnerability, that emotional vulnerability, and it starts there. So if we can bring it in even earlier before the term mental health maybe becomes part of the conversation. And this is where, how do we allow people to be vulnerable in a safe space and possibly reduce the potential for physical and emotional and mental health concerns. And rather, as the word that we talked about the other day a little bit, how do we turn that into mental fitness? Because it becomes part of the everyday, not something unusual or out of the norm. So maybe it is time to share your story, because I think it's the power of storytelling is what you bring to the conversation. And sadly, through your own events. And that's how stories evolve, I suppose. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you and be able to hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a miracle that I survived, so I'm blessed to be here.
Mm.
So yeah, going back to the 11th of January 2011, working in Hull in the UK. It was one of the worst winters I can think back to we've had in a long, long time. 2011 was a really bad winter. Just before Christmas, probably starting towards like in November, as a machine operator, I'd started digging out a trench, and as a team, we was installing an underground fire hydrant system.
Mm.
So the trench wasn't that deep. It was probably about a meter in places, but we dug it out and we'd installed the pipework, and then we stopped for Christmas for 2 weeks. And then on the 11th of January 2011, we'd gone back. But I woke up that morning. A lot of my working life, I've worked away from home. And on this job, I was home, which was a good thing. So I was able to get up with my two kids that morning. Like Harry was 4, Joe was 8. Give him a kiss, got him ready for nursery school. I said, right, I'm off to work. I'll see you tonight. And just a normal day. Other than it being cold and icy and snowing, it was a normal winter's day. And when we got to work, I thought I was going to carry on digging out the next section of what we'd started before Christmas. But we was told that the section that we'd installed, 60 metres, needed hydrostatic pressure testing. Now, I'd never done a hydrostatic pressure test. I had no training in it. I'd never actually witnessed it being done. 5 of us in the team. I think a couple of lads might have known about it, but again, none of us had any training. And they couldn't get a specialist team in with it being so soon after Christmas. So what they did was brought a guy in from the agency to kind of overlook the task. And he was a competent guy. He had a street works card, and apparently that gave him the competency to be able to do it. We went through the risk assessment, method statement, signed permits, did everything that you'd normally do. Went out to site, did our on-site risk assessment, slips, trips, access, egress. And then I'm a digger driver. So basically I had nothing to do, and it was freezing cold. So I gets in my machine, turns the engine on, turns the heaters on, and that's me sat nice and warm until these guys get this tested. It sounded so simple. Fill the pipe with water. Once there's water coming out the valve, put the pump on, pressurize it to 28 bar of pressure. Once we get to 28 bar of pressure, it gets passed off and we can start on the next section. After about an hour of testing, the spigot end, which was obviously a big chunk of steel, 600 mil, it weighed about 460 kilograms, so it's a big heavyweight. It started leaking at the flange, and it was only a small leak, but it started leaking. So the guy who was brought in, the competent guy, said, right, stop the pump, get in there and tighten up that nut and bolt on the flange. Mm. So we had Anthony and Jordan with us, 2 young lads, both 18, keen to get something done because it's cold. So they puts the harnesses on, gets in the trench, and they tighten it up. They get out, turn the pump back on. About an hour or so later, it gets to 5 bar, it starts leaking again, different area. So again, they do the same, they stop the pump, they get in and tighten it up. It gets to lunchtime, and it's at 10 bar of pressure, and it starts leaking again. And at that point, we get told, as part of our health and safety course we do and all the toolboxes, if something doesn't feel right, stop what you're doing, stop the job. And at that point, the guys had been in and out a few times tightening it up, and I didn't even know what 1 bar of pressure was capable of back then, but it didn't feel right. There was something in my gut. So I stopped the job, and I said to one of the guys, go to the office, have a word with the manager, and just explain that it's leaked at 3 bar, 5 bar, it's now leaking at 10 bar. What do we do? So one of the guys gets in the van, goes back to the office, 5-minute drive through site, explained that to the manager. He went on to the manufacturer's website and manufactured the pipework, and it stated on there that if it's all put together correctly, it can be tested up to 38 bar, no problems. It can't go nowhere. So, and then he said, "Oh, what has John said?" That was the guy with the streetwear card. He said, "Oh, John just keeps saying turn the pump off and tighten it up." He said, "Yeah, just go and do that then." So Jim comes back. He said, "No, it's fine. It can't go nowhere. Just keep doing what we're doing." So the guys jumped back in, and then they tightened it up. And then it gets to 2 minutes past 3. It's dark nights. We finish work at 4 o'clock, and I hear Jordan shout, "Oh no, it's leaking again." He probably there was a swear word in there, but I won't say that. But he was like, "It's leaking again." He said, and it was at 18 bar of pressure thereabouts. Now in my
Wow.
mind, yeah, in my mind, it's 2 minutes past 3. We'll pack up at about 3:45. It's taken all day to get to 18 bar. We've still got another 10 bar to go. And I don't want to work late. I've been sat here all day. I don't want to be here till silly o'clock. I just want to get done and go home.
Mm.
So, in all my wisdom, I knew that I was physically stronger than these two young lads. I was about 16 stone. I'd been working out since I was 16 years of age. So I jumped out my machine and I just thought, if I tighten up all 24 nuts and bolts as tight as I can get them, it's going to stop leaking and it'll get up to pressure and we can go. So I jumped out my machine. I said, "Give us your harness, give us the spanners. I'm getting in the trench." They started laughing. They used to call me Fatty. They was like, "Go on, Fatty, you do it." And then I put the harness on. I had the spanners in my hand. As I get to the ladder to enter the trench, I pass the spanners to one of the other guys. And then I enter the trench. I'm stood in front of the 60 meters and the spigot end that weighs 460 kilograms, which we were assured can't go nowhere. And then as I reached up to my left for the spanners, the end had blown. But I didn't know that, obviously. Basically, the end blew off at 18 bar. There must have been a lot of air trapped in the pipe because with the initial blast, I must have been thrown in the air because my boots was found 20 feet away on another part of the site. So there must have been a lot of pressure going through my body in order to fire my boots off that far. But then I woke up underwater. So I didn't know where I was. I just woke up. I was underwater. I thought I was in the local river. I had no idea how I got there. I couldn't get out. I felt like basically it's like being in a washing machine. I was just getting thrown around. I didn't know which way was up, and all I could think about was not dying. All I could think about was my kids and my family. And I remember I'm not a religious person, but I was praying to God, please, 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 I can't die. I'm 32, I can't leave my boys. I was physically screaming for my mum. I was only trapped, drowning under there for just around about a minute, which when I say that, it doesn't sound like a long time, but a minute drowning, trapped in your own mind, believing that this is it, you're going to die, there's no way out. When they say your life flashes before you, it was, my life truly flashed before me. And then I thought I was fighting to get out, but I wasn't. What had happened was when the initial blast, there was a massive bang. I don't remember that, but there was a massive bang and a wall of water. It was explained as what's burst out the pipes, come at everyone. So everybody's turned and ran to protect themselves. And then Jordan, the young lad, he's only 18. He turned around and he saw me face down in the water. So he jumped into the trench. The trench is now full. Like I now know there's around 7,000 gallons of water in that pipe, which has all come out to the end of, or majority of it come out to the end of the trench. He's jumped in and seen me laid there. He thought I was dead, but he's grabbed me and lifted me out of the water. Now, my harness and my boiler suit had been kind of blown clean off my shoulders with a blast. And then, obviously, as I said, my boots was blown off. And as he lifted me out, I just remember seeing loads of faces because everyone had heard the bang and come running over. And everyone's looking at me and screaming at me to breathe. And I remember being stood there thinking, somebody please help me, I can't breathe. And I was still drowning basically. And then if Jordan somehow, because like I said, I was a big lad, I was about 16 stone, Jordan, with the help of the water probably, passed me out of the trench. And the guys pulled me out, and as they was pulling me out, the water dislodged, and I was able to get my breath. Now, considering what had happened, as I said, the pipe was 600 mil, the trench was only 1200, so there's not a lot of room in there either side. But if that spigot end had have hit me, it would have cut me in half. It would have killed me outright. My 8-ton digger arm was actually in the trench behind me, and it moved my digger arm a meter or so to the end of the trench with the force. So I think the spigot end actually flew like 3 or 4 meters. That's how much power was behind it. There was a large water main running directly behind us, running at 8 bar of pressure, and the spigot end went underneath that. But if the spigot end had fractured that as it passed, nobody would have got anywhere near me to get me out, because it'd been constant pressure
Wow.
at 8 bar. So to say I am very lucky is an understatement. Now, injury-wise, I had a cut in the back of my head that needed stitches. I had pipe beddings. I had gravel stuck in my face, my head, my chest, like shrapnel where it had blown at me. My elbows had hyperextended, so my arms had gone the wrong way and tore all the tendons in my arms. And
Ow.
all the all the lower part of my body, I had cuts and bruises and stuff everywhere, but
Mm.
all my legs and everything was just completely battered by probably the initial pressure. I didn't break any bones. I think I had a small fracture in just above my mouth, which it was like an airline fracture. But other than that, I was very, very lucky. And yeah, it's crazy that I survived it. Apparently, you've got more chance of winning the lottery than you have of surviving that type of incident. So,
Quite possibly. Yeah.
so very lucky. So for me, the reason I now do what I do though is the mental health journey it took me on. So physically, I had to go for physio. I needed cortisol injections in my elbows just to be able to move my arms. Obviously, I got to hospital eventually, and they wanted to keep me in because obviously I drowned. I had a head injury, so they wanted to keep an eye on me.
Mm.
But while they were trying to find me a bed, this is about 11:30 at night. All I wanted to do was get home to my kids because they knew that Dad had been in an accident. So I could stand up and I could kind of shuffle, but I couldn't walk. But I just said to the doctors, "Look, I ain't staying here. There's no need to me. I'm going home," and I discharged myself. But that night, once I laid with my boys until they fell asleep, and then when I went to bed, the second I kept telling myself I'm all right. I was still in shock, obviously,
Yeah. You're
but
living on adrenaline. Yeah.
yeah, the second when I eventually fell to sleep, as soon as I say to people, when we're not off sometimes and we'll feel like we fell off a cliff and our leg will kick, and in that exact moment, I relived every second of that accident. So the smells, the bubbles, screaming to God, please, 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 I can't die, screaming for my mum. And then Katie, my partner at the time, the boy's mum, woke me up and said, "Steve, you're having a nightmare." And I was having a full-on panic attack. I couldn't breathe. She calmed me down, got me a glass of water, tried to sleep again maybe an hour, a couple of hours later, and the exact same thing happened again. As soon as I drifted off, I was back underwater. I was back trapped. So my way of dealing with that the next day was we had a fridge full of beer from Christmas still. We had bottles of spirits, and I said to Katie, "Will you do me a favour? Will you get me a can out of the fridge?" And she said, "No, you can't drink because you're on the strongest painkillers that the hospital could give you. You're not advised to drink on them." I said, "I'll be all right. It's just a beer."
Mm.
And that one beer ended up being whatever was left. I don't know whether it was 8, 10, 12 beers, but I finished them all off.
Mm.
The following day, I turned to the spirits. So whatever Jack Daniels was left, vodka, and Katie wouldn't actually get me a drink. She didn't agree with it. So I couldn't get to the kitchen. So I was sending Joe, my 8-year-old son, to pour me a drink. And like looking back now, I just hate the idea of it. But at the time, it was what I felt I needed to take the edge off. And then me and Katie argued, and eventually she did go to shop for me and bought me. We couldn't afford anything. We just had Christmas. We lived week to week, and she went to shop and got me a cheap bottle of cider, just like big bottle of cider, and I was drinking them for a few days, and then the drinking just progressively got worse and worse. And I didn't know when I was going to be, if I was going to work again or when I'd be back at work. I didn't know when I was going to earn any money. Didn't know what was happening on down that front. So I was using credit cards that was literally already maxed out from Christmas to gamble, to try and win money, to try and pay for alcohol, to pay for food, to pay for bills. I was borrowing off my mum, and then my mum was like, she'd drop me a crate of beer on occasion, and then Katie said to her, "You need to stop doing it. Stop bringing him alcohol because he's drinking so much."
Mm.
So then I fell out with my mum because she wouldn't help me. I said to her, right, well, I used emotional blackmail, and I said, if you're not going to help me, then obviously you don't care. So don't come and see the boys because you're not seeing them. And I ended up falling out with my mum because I fell out with my mum. My sister fell out with me. I was arguing with Katie constantly. And one thing that really, really gets to me is like I remember Harry coming over to me. This is like weeks now after the accident. And I remember Harry coming over to me to play. And I physically just, as he went to jump on me, I pushed him away and literally swore at him and said, go to your mum. And he ran off crying. And then Joe's, because all of a sudden I was angry, Joe sat playing with his toys in the living room doing nothing. And then I had to go at him and showered at him and said, get all that cleared up and get out my face, go away. And then went and sat in the bathroom and just cried for like 5 minutes and thought, why am I being like this? What's wrong with me? I splashed my face, walked out, and I remember Katie looking at me and saying, are you all right? And I just smiled at her and said, yeah, of course I am. I'm good. I'm dealing with it. Now, I wasn't good. And looking back, I definitely wasn't dealing with it. I was broken. At that point, I was mentally broken. I believed that I cheated death that day, and that was my day to die. And a bit like the film Final Destination, because I cheated death, it's gonna keep coming for me. And I didn't leave the house. I didn't go for physio for my injections. I'd make sure that I'd had a drink in the morning, so that was an excuse that I couldn't go. Even though I was in pain and I couldn't move and I needed it, the fear of going out was where. And then the intrusive thoughts started, and I started thinking, well, why am I waiting for it to come to me? Why don't I just do it myself? But the idea of that, I didn't want anybody to find me because I know that's then going to put trauma on them for the rest of their life. So I just wanted to disappear. And then in my mind, if I disappear, they'll get over me. And the only way I could think of disappearing in where I'm from is the Humber Bridge, which is classed as a suicide spot. And one night after a lot of drinking, I got in my car, I drove to the bridge with all intentions of not going home. And I sat there and I couldn't get out. I've knowing what it feels like to drown and to be trapped underwater. I just couldn't do it. And I don't even know how long I was sat in my car, but I just sat in my car and cried for hours. And then eventually I knew I had to go home. So I turned around and I went home. And then when I went in, Katie was waiting and she had a proper go at me because I'd been drinking all day and I'm driving and where you been? And I couldn't tell her where I'd been because I didn't want her to worry, even though she was probably worried anyhow because of my behaviours over the last few weeks. I didn't see that at the time. And I think in my mind, I was trying to protect my family and didn't want them to worry about me. But obviously, we had a massive argument. And then she said, look, we can't carry on like this. You either ring a doctor and you get help, or you pack a bag and leave because it's not fair on the boys. It's not fair on me. You need to sort yourself out. So I went upstairs and I started packing a bag. And I thought, well, I'm going anyhow. So I'm throwing all my stuff into this bar. I don't even know what I was putting in it, just pants, socks, whatever. And as I'm doing that, I had another really vivid flashback. I'm trapped underwater and I'm praying to God, please, 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 I can't leave my kids. Please let me survive. And it just hit me. Here I am, ready to leave my kids. And I just had a full on breakdown. I fell to the floor. I had panic attacks. I couldn't breathe. And then Katie and the kids came running up. They've got hold of me. And she said, right, I'm ringing the doctor. Doctor came out. He took one look at me. He said, Steve, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a GP, but you've got PTSD, you've got anxiety, you've got depression. And I started laughing at him and said, PTSD, guys like me don't get PTSD. You get that at war, in war zones, because that's what I associated it with, was the forces. And he explained that anybody who's gone through trauma can suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. He got me an appointment at mental health hospital the following day, where I sat with a lady and I told her everything I've just told you guys, but in a lot more detail. And she looked at me with a tear in her eye and she said, Steve, I'm really, really sorry, but I can't help you. I'm not qualified enough. She said, I need to speak to my colleague. We'll be in touch really, really soon. Now, for me, I didn't believe anybody could help me. And that kind of cemented that just proved that to me. She just said she can't help me. So my dad had taken me to the appointment. On the way home, I got him to stop at a garage shop, and I got a cheap bottle of vodka and went home. My dad was like, "What you got that for?" I said, "I need a drink." He left me at the door. I went in. Katie saw the bottle in my hand and just turned away. She didn't want an argument. I went upstairs, and I remember drinking that bottle. I probably drank it within 5 or 10 minutes. But with every mouthful, I was crying into it that I don't want to wake up. Please don't let me wake up. And yeah, I must have finished the bottle, fell asleep, and then Katie woke me up the following afternoon or mid morning and said, "Look, you've got to get out of bed. You've got to get up. You've got another appointment at the hospital." And I said, "What's the point?" And she said, "There's every point. Come on, you've got to get there." And this time I sat with a different lady and again told her everything. I told her that I'd downed a bottle of vodka and not wanting to wake up. I was truthful about everything. And she smiled at me and said, "Steve, I can help you." She said, "I'm kind of an expert in post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what you're really, really dealing with." She said, "I ain't saying it's going to be easy, but over the next 4 months, we can get you into a better place." And the second she said that was like a big, heavy rucksack had just been lifted off my back.
Mm.
It was like the second she said what I was going through was normal, and she knew that I'd been trying to hard it, and everything she said made sense.
Mm.
And I just felt this massive weight come off my back. And yeah, that was where my life started to turn around. Like the therapy, it was through the NHS. It wasn't amazing. Like when my hour was up, she'd be like, "Right, see you on Thursday," and I could walk out of there feeling worse than when I went in.
Mm.
But she did put me on the path to being who I am today. And on my very last session, because I kept refusing antidepressants because of the stigma around them,
Mm.
she wrote me a prescription, and she said, "Look, they're there as backup. If you start to sink down again into this hole, take them and get back in touch." And she said, "But do me a favour." I said, "What's that?" She said, "I know you, and you're probably going to go pop and have a pint in your local pub on your way home." She said, "Don't." She said, "Go home and start to learn about the mind. Start to learn about yourself. Start to learn about mindfulness, about nutrition, the link between nutrition and the mind." And when she said mindfulness, I started laughing, and I said, "That's all that meditation and all that, innit?" I said, "Not a chance." I said, "It's not for me." I said, and obviously we'd gone through a lot of like breath work and stuff for the anxiety,
Mhm.
and I was like, "Nah," I said, "That's not for me." But she'd planted a seed, and when I did on the way home, I went straight past my local pub. I went in, I got my computer out, and I started reading about spirituality to start with. 'Cause I started believing that I wasn't meant to die that day. I didn't cheat there. I was actually meant to get in there because if I hadn't, Anthony and Jordan might not be here today. So I got in there for a reason, and I survived for a reason. And and then I started reading about guardian angels, and like I said, I've never been religious or spiritual. I've always thought it's mumbo jumbo, but that kind of put me on this spiritual journey. I started studying like Buddhism and different religions and reading up on stuff. And then I came across NLP and self hypnosis,
Mhm.
and yeah, I've studied all of that ever since, like for 12 years, and I'm now a life coach and coach people on a daily basis. So
Phew. Yeah.
that is that's what happened, and that's why I'm now who I am today.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
know,
know
I
if I
think
can talk because I've got the tears running down my face. Thank you all over.
I'm trying not to look at you.
Yeah, don't.
I didn't mean to cause to you. I apologize. Life's good now.
That's the main thing.
So yeah, and then
Oh.
basically just to lighten it up a little bit, 5 years ago, because of all the studying that I'd done and the tools and techniques that had helped me get out of my dark hole where I was, I just found myself helping random people. You know, like even in supermarkets and stuff.
Mm.
I'm not the most approachable guy. I'm quite big, bald head, tattoos. Most people turn them in the opposite direction. But once people start talking to me, and then they just feel this, they just naturally open up about about how they was feeling or what they was going through.
Mm.
And then I started giving them tools and techniques that had helped me.
Mm.
And they'd say, "Well, I've had therapy for 10 years. Why has no one ever told me this?" And I'd be like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe it's just lived experience." And then they'd get in touch and say, "That really, really worked. Like my anxiety is nowhere near where it was, or I'm feeling better." And then someone said, you should do this as a business.
Mm.
And I was like, I can't set up a business. And I'm like, I didn't go to college. I didn't go to college or anything. I started life as a labourer. I ain't even got no GCSEs. It was like, it was not possible. But I looked into it, and within 2 days, I'd set up Steve Kirby Life Coach UK or SK Life Coach UK.
Mm.
And then I had no intention of becoming a speaker. What I wanted to do was, my thoughts at the time was, a lot of guys in construction won't go for therapy because it's not manly, if you like.
Mm.
Yeah.
And they've got that same attitude I had. I'm dealing with it. I'll be all right. But I thought, if they can see my story and see where I've come from, then rather than going for therapy, they might want coaching. So rather than going over the past, we can look at moving forward. So I put a post on LinkedIn just explaining who I am and why I do what I do, and a bit about the accident. And one of the safety directors from Skanska at the time, it must have popped up on his feed, and he saw it. And he said, Steve, can I give you a call? So I said, yeah. And then as soon as he answered the phone, he said, am I right in reading that you survived an 18-bar pressure test failure? So I said, yeah. He said, how? I said,
Yeah.
I said, I'm guess I'm, yeah. I said, I guess I'm just really, really lucky. He said, Steve, that same year, he said, we actually had a fatality on site. He said, it wasn't hydrostatic, it was gas, but it's still a pressure system. He said, and the pipe failed at 3 bar, and the guy died instantly. But looking at your images and our site, it just looks so the same. He said, I had to speak to that guy's family. He said, I had to lead the investigation. So he said, would you come to our office in London and share your story? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, just literally, there'll be all the management, safety team. He said, just share it. And I was like, why? And he said, because there's a lot of lessons we can learn from it. So I said, yeah, that's fine. And then because I was off work for 7 months, but then I actually went back to work on that site for about 4 years and became site supervisor, and I had a good relationship. So I got in touch with the client, because as I said, I had a good relationship on there. I worked on there for 4 years after the accident. And I said, can I have some information from the investigation? And he said, no, I don't think we're going to want you to do that. And I said, well, why? I'm not going to mention the client. I'm not going to mention contractors or anything else, literally just the story. And he said, leave it with me. So I left it a couple of weeks, sent him an email, sent him messages, tried calling him, and he was just ignoring me. He wasn't replying. So somebody said to me, if you write to the health and safety executive through freedom of information, they'll give you the full report. It's like they're the governing body, so they'll have everything. So I wrote to them and I explained who I was, the times, the date, the incident, and I got an email back saying, sorry, Steve, we don't know anything of you or of an incident or anything that's happened. So I then thought, well, that's strange. So I sent another email to my contact and I said, why don't the HSE know anything about the accident? And he'd been ignoring me for weeks, and he rang me up within 5 minutes and said, what do you mean? What's the HSE said? So I said, well, you didn't get back to me. So freedom of information, I sent off for the investigation. So he said, oh, do you want to come on site tomorrow and we'll explain how we reported it? So I said, yeah. I thought, I need to know. So I goes to the site, and I was expecting to see a laptop or a folder with a report of some kind. And all there was an A4 piece of paper with dangerous occurrence written across the top of it and a number. And in the box it said, operatives suffered minor injuries during a hydro test failure. And that was the only information. I've got it in the cupboard, what was on there. So I said, so you're telling me it was a near miss, basically. It was a dangerous occurrence. So he said, well, yeah, because she didn't break any bones and because she came on site the next morning, that's how we did it. Now, going back to the accident, the client had their own on-site ambulance and their own medical facility. So after about 15 minutes, I'm in and out of consciousness. I don't remember much of this, but the ambulance turns up. The lads have stripped me half naked because it's ice cold water. So they're trying to warm me up and stop the bleeding. 2 guys get out the ambulance. One comes over to me, one goes over to the trench, and he's on his radio and he's looking around what's happened, trying to kind of put a picture together. They then get me into the ambulance with sirens and flashing lights, take me to the medical facility. They strip me completely naked and then realise they haven't got any clothes that fit me and they haven't even got a blanket. So they put me in a paper hazmat suit, just a see-through paper suit. And then they put a work coat on me. The stick of gauze on my head to stop the bleeding. And then they got me back in the ambulance. So I thought I was on my way to the emergency room, so Hull Royal Infirmary. Sirens and flashing lights, but then about 2 minutes later we stopped and we was in the site car park and they got me out of the site ambulance, put me into a colleague's car and told him to take me to the minor injuries unit on the council estate, like 10 minutes away, to get my head stitched up. We go to minor injuries, sat in there for about half an hour because the guys, they didn't know what had happened and no one had rang through. So they weren't expecting me. And when I turned up, I just sat at the back while James spoke to the guy in reception and he said, he needs stitches in the back of his head. He said, yeah, we'll get to him. And then a nurse came through and looked at me and was like, she swore. She was like, what the are you doing here?
Mm.
And you look like you've been beat up by 10 men. And James said, oh, has the company not rang up? She said, no, nobody. I said, I can't help you. You need to be at A&E. You need to be at hospital. You need to be at hospital now. So she was going to get me an ambulance, but James said that it'll be quicker for him to get me through. It was only like 20 minutes through town centre. So I get to hospital and I get the pipe bedding took out and I get stitched up and I have my scans and all the rest of it. But on the way to hospital, sorry, I don't remember this either, but it's what I've been told. On the way to hospital, Jim's phone rang and it was the shift manager, the site manager from the client. And he said, right, what's happening? So James said, we've been to minor injuries, but I've got to take him to Hull Royal Infirmary. I've got to take him to hospital. His words were, for say, make sure you're both on site tomorrow and put the phone down. So I get to
Wow.
hospital. I need to get home to my kids. But in the back of my mind, I don't know if I was thinking this, but I know how I would have been thinking. We've just had Christmas. I've got no money. We've got no savings. I've got a manager telling me I've got to be back on site tomorrow. So when them doctors are telling me I've got to stay in because I've drowned and I've got a head injury, I want to get home to my kids, but in my mind as well, I've got to be at work tomorrow. So I discharged myself, went home, had the nightmares, as I said, the flashbacks. The next morning at 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door, and it's one of the guys from work, and he turned up with a minibus, and he said, "Steve," he said, "I'm sorry, but you've got to come on site. We need to get a statement." And I said, "I can't walk. I was in pain. Obviously, I couldn't move." He said, "Don't worry, I'll help you into the bus." He said, "You just got to come on site to give a statement." I gets to site. The director came over to me and said, "I'm sorry this has happened, Steve, but I need a statement." So I said, "Well, can I give it now and go then, please? Because I haven't slept and I'm in agony." And he said, "No, I need to speak to the other 5 guys first. I'll speak to you this afternoon. It'll be about 1:30." Now, I didn't stay that long. One of the supervisors saw me and he said, "You're not staying here." And he got me in his van and he took me back home again. And then I was off 7 months. But looking back at it all now, the reason that their ambulance couldn't leave site, it's a site ambulance.
Yeah.
If they'd have rang me an ambulance, they would have then informed the police, who would have then informed the health and safety executive.
Exactly.
So from that very moment, they chose to cover it up. They knew if I didn't get on, if I didn't swipe on site the next morning, if there was no record of me swiping on site, they'd have a lost time incident on the road.
Exactly. Mm.
So they made sure that I was back on site. And then to find out 7 years later that it wasn't even reported, Skanska had a fertility a few months doing a similar job. And if my incident or the incident on that site had been investigated properly by the health and safety exec, then they'd have put a briefing out UK wide about procedures and about that incident, what we could have learned from. And that guy might still be today. It might not be, but
Yeah.
it could have been.
Yeah.
If we don't report something, we don't learn from it. And the only reason they didn't want a lost time incident as the client was because there'd be so many guys at the very top of that tree who wouldn't have got their end of year bonus if they'd have had a lost time incident. The principal contractor went on to lose the contract. It was like multi-million pounds. So the ripple effect of the accident impacted a lot of people. But the only reason the client wouldn't report it in that way was what I've been told by somebody from the same organisation is because certain people at the top of that ladder wouldn't have got their NDE bonus. Now, for me, you cannot offer monetary rewards around safety because it encourages non-reporting. So, and there is still companies out there that do it, and it's like, give that money to the guys on the ground instead. Give them more time in order to get the jobs done rather than putting the pressure on them to get the job done. Why give money to prevent for safety when it's just going to encourage non-reporting?
That is a debate we have so regularly.
Yeah.
Actually, I was working with a client a couple of years ago, and the guys were going, all these other companies offer safety bonuses and they offer this. Why don't they do it here? You need to speak to them, Nuala. You must tell them this is what we want. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to congratulate them. And they were like, what? I said, and this is why, and exactly your story. Because when you reward certain behavior, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, 100%. It just encourages non-reporting. I've had it myself on other sites where like I strapped my thumb in some concrete on a crusher, and I needed, like, my thumb had swollen up. I needed to go and get it checked out. And again, I was just kind of rushed off site, took in a car, went and got it sorted. I was back on site within a couple of hours, and then they put me on light duty for a couple of days. That happens, and I get that. But as long as it's put in the medical book and there's record of it and whatever else. But when it comes to covering up lost time incidents like that, then that just impacts so many people. Don't learn from it, and people can die because they've not learned from them lessons.
So true.
Yeah, that same site, now we're talking 13 years later since my accident. That same site, that client, different principal contractor. I'm not going to name anyone or anything, but a few months ago, they put a post up on LinkedIn saying we've gone 2.5 years about a lost time incident. Now, my uncle works on that site, and last year, I think it was November time last year, he got hit by a forklift. Now, he wasn't in, but he could have broke his legs. He went into the back of his legs and basically pulled his muscles. But they did the same. The ambulance came to him, the off-site ambulance, took him off-site, put him in someone's car. He went to minor injuries. He got assessed. He came back, and they picked him up the next morning because he couldn't walk properly, and they put him on light duty for 3 weeks in an office. Now, that's the same client, same site, different principal contractor, but the culture's still the same. And yet they're saying they've not had a lost time incident. That should have been a lost time incident. Yeah. But again, I reckon that same client is still offering bonuses for safety. And that's why it's the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what we try to do when we're working with clients, is to help them think differently about all of that. But there's a problem, a systemic problem in the industry, in that, well, that's an assessment, all right? Until work is not won by a number called LTI, it's going to be very difficult to change.
Yeah.
You know, because unfortunately, the next contract comes by that number being low. And whilst that systemic problem exists, whether it's oil and gas, construction, doesn't matter, right? Probably the only place it doesn't happen too much is actually the airline industry. But they invite the conversations. It's not like what the rest do. So until that shifts in some way, it's going to be it's a difficult problem. I was on a project in Chad several years ago, and they were having that big celebratory dinner with everybody on site, you know, celebrating 10,000 man years or whatever it was. I can't remember exactly, but it was some extraordinary number without an LTI. There was a man in hospital having his thumb stitched on. But because they didn't send him back to home, it didn't have to be recorded that way. Now, the sad part is, when we're on site working in the role that we work in, what we've got to try and do is keep morale up as much as anything else that we do for the community that's on site. There was lots of people thinking, we're not stupid, but we're going to enjoy the barbecue. And on the other side of the coin, you're sort of like, well, it's great that they're celebrating your individual successes. Don't look at the big picture. It is very, very challenging. Yeah, very challenging.
One of the things we talk about is that blame fixes nothing. And that's whether it's in the context of work and I mean, I love Todd Confident's description of blame is a bit like peeing in your pants. It feels all warm and fuzzy for a moment and then it just gets awkward.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if we think about that conversation and without maybe coming at it from a place of blame, but what would you like to see being done differently going forward?
As in, when it comes to reporting, I think it's everything that I'm kind of preaching about when I do my talks stems from communication, from the boots on the ground to management. And then when you're communicating as a team and you've got that rapport and you create that trust, then everything gets done a lot better, a lot safer. People feel open to talk. But these companies, like that same client who is offering cash for bonuses around safety, that to me, that's something that has to change across the board for everybody. You can't monetize safety. Everyone says like safety is our number one priority. Safety is not someone's number one priority. Profit is, or there's no business. We've got to earn money, and if safety is taking up a lot of money in that, they are going to take risks and cut corners and do whatever they need to do to get the project finished. Safety, I've worked on many sites where safety is number one priority and zero tolerance and all this and everything else, but you've got all your permits, you've got all your paperwork, but if something needs doing and then need it doing now, you go and do it on a Saturday, and there's not many people about. You'll get you in, you do the job. That's got to change. Like safety, health and safety is a priority. It's got to be on par with whatever the business is. But there's so many. I speak all over the UK and a little bit across Europe, and some businesses are absolutely amazing. You can see what they're trying to do around safety, around mental health, around communication. And then you get others that are like, yeah, we'll put 2 people on a mental health first aid course. And it's like the culture. Like I remember driving through one of the sites and there's people sat on a roller on the mobile phone, like talking while they're working. There's a machine man sat with his foot up on his mobile phone, using his elbow to operate the machine. And I'm like, are you going to stop and say something? And he's like, well, what can I say? I'm like, well, you've got to tell them. Do you know what I mean? Or they're just going to carry on and encourage other people to do the same. I said, the safety culture, you're going to end up, you're riding on luck. You know what I mean? Something's going to go drastically wrong. But again, some companies put a lot into it, some not so much. They just want to get the job done and get paid. But I think when it comes to cash bonuses around safety and projects, that's what's got to stop for me, because that just encourages non-reporting, and then we're not going to learn. We're not going to move forward.
We're on the same hymn sheet there.
Oh, absolutely.
Pardon the pun. All right. There are so many key points from this that I think what I'd like to say at this point is that we're going to listen to this and we're going to pull out the key learnings from this conversation, and we'll share that with you, and we'll put that, because our conversation becomes a written document as well.
Yeah.
So we'll put some energy and effort to actually go a little bit further than beyond transcript type thing, and really also make people pull out some key points, and we'll share that with you maybe, and we can, go back and forth. And I'm saying this for everybody to hear us say that this is what we're going to do. So can't tell you how much we appreciate the time that you've given us for this. And I think this is such a powerful conversation to share with everybody that wants to listen. And we really do hope people will listen and listen to the nuance of what is actually behind all of this.
Sorry for jumping in.
No, go for it.
Like when I finish my presentation, because a lot of my presentation I do talk about behavioural safety and the choices we make to save time, to save money. Yeah. And often before we do something, we'll tell ourselves, it'll be all right. Like, we have that conversation with ourselves. If something doesn't feel right, it's like, I'll be okay. It'll be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And most of us think, like me at 32, I thought I was kind of immortal. I was going to live till I'm old, and nothing could hurt me. I wasn't scared of anything. But I learned that day that we are really, really vulnerable. You know, like, and our minds, no matter how mentally strong we think we are, it can turn on us at any point. It's really, really delicate. And if you're having to tell yourself it'll be all right, it'll be okay, then just take a step back and just ask yourself, but what if it's not? What is worst case scenario? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to do? And that's whether it's something physical, it's turning up on site and you haven't got the correct PPE, but you think, oh, it's a 2-minute job, it'll be all right. Will it be all right though? You know, like, what is it going to impact you in 5 years if you haven't got a dust mask now, but you're going to carry on doing the job? In 5 years' time, you're going to look back and think, I wish I'd have wore that mask. So if you're having to tell yourself it'll be okay, it'll be all right, or even with your mental health, if you're struggling with your mental health and you're telling yourself, like I did, I'm dealing with it, I'm all right. Are you really dealing with it? Could you deal with it any better by speaking to somebody? And then I kind of, like, life is a story, and we go through chapters. And some people go through a really, really dark chapter. Now, construction in the UK, you're looking at 2 guys a day ending their life.
Sure.
Wow.
And like last year across all sectors, 138 people died at work. Now, a lot of the fatalities, obviously the incident, it comes down to lack of training, it comes down to the risks, it comes down to trying to save time, trying to save money. And for me, we shouldn't be losing that amount of people in 2024. The safety protocols we've got, the procedures, the PPE, the working standards we've got, we shouldn't be losing anyone. And when it comes to losing 2 guys a day to the mental health, again, even though more is being done, even more needs to be done. We need to talk. So for me, life is a story, and we go through chapters, and we might go through a really, really bad chapter, but that doesn't have to be the end of your story. If you reach out and get help to rewrite the next chapter, you can go on to live an amazing life. I'm now living my best life. I'm doing something that I'm passionate about. I'm married to my childhood sweetheart. We was together when we were 16 and not seen each other for 20 odd years, and got married last year. Never been happier. But me, 13 years ago, I wouldn't have seen this being able to know. Like, I wouldn't. This was never going to happen. Yeah, I'm not with Katie, but me and Katie split amicably like nearly 3 years ago. Kids have grown up. Harry's now 17. Joe's 21. And we're all really, really happy, doing really, really well. But back then, I couldn't see this. Whereas I've gone through them chapters now, and with a bit of understanding and a bit of learning, started to write my next one, and life's never been better. So if somebody is in a dark place, you will get out of it. You just got to speak to somebody.
Yeah.
I think that is a beautiful note to finish on.
Thank you for joining us today. It is always lovely to have conversations that matter. To learn more about creating a culture of safety and care, please visit our website, safetycollaborations.com, to access our show notes, resources, and guides. Leave us a message via the Message Us section on the show notes page, and we'll get back to you.
You can also join our community on social media by following us on our LinkedIn pages, Safety Collaborations, Karen Avari and Nuala Gage, and on our new Safety Collaborations social channels, YouTube, Facebook and Instagram. Our handle Safety Collaborations is much the same. Sharing is caring. Follow us on your favourite podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star review would be awesome. Doing these things helps us to grow and share our collective conversations. Till next time,
Stay safe
and stay well.